Why have horror games lost their magic? If you're like me, you love horror games. You sit down and you try the next big thing that comes out, but then you leave very disappointed. Maybe a few jump scares got to you, but nothing really stayed with you. Like when you watch a horror film and you think about it for the next week or two. When you play a game and you feel something really deep inside that's very unsettling every time you think about it. When a horror game has a deep impact on you, the chances are pretty high that you played a very good horror game. Lately, I find myself playing horror games and they leave little to no impact on me. And if they do leave an impact, it's quite terrible. What happened to those horror games where we could play them and tell our friends for years to come that if you want to be scared shitless, that is the horror game to play? What happened to those games? Maybe nothing happened to the games. Maybe we've changed, but I don't believe that. The first reason I believe that horror games have lost their magic is because they have the wrong idea of horror. I'm gonna take Alien Isolation as the first example. I am not particularly fond of this game, even though I hear a lot of people say that it is their favorite horror game or it's the greatest horror game of all time. I highly disagree with that. To me, the game is frightening, but it isn't scary. That may sound very redundant, but let's talk about it. The first time I played Alien Isolation, I felt unease. I hadn't seen the alien yet. I've just heard some sounds. The only enemies I had faced at first were AI. As I crept through the ship and I tried to progress, I looked at vents above my head thinking, oh no, the alien is gonna jump down on me and it's gonna attack me. What should I do? I literally froze up on stream and didn't move for a few minutes. But as I progressed, as I fought AI enemies, as I moved past these robots, and I finally made it to the point where I had my first encounter with the xenomorph, I was severely disappointed. The first jump scare, I was quite terrified. Dude jumped my ass and I wasn't expecting that. The second time, my heart still got to pumping as he ran towards me at full speed and I couldn't run from him. The third time, I started to feel annoyed, and the fourth time and the fifth time, eventually I just gave up the game and didn't continue it. And maybe you could say, oh, I quit because of the difficulty, but I quit because it got really annoying. It wasn't scary anymore, and everything I had faced up until that point felt really repetitive. A horror game should never leave you to a point where you feel more annoyed than you do feel afraid. That game did a few things right, but it failed at one of its most important moments. Now we're gonna talk about a game that left me absolutely terrified, and I hate to play the game to this day. Silent Hills Playable Teaser, PT. Why is PT scary? This part may sound a bit random, but hear me out. If you've ever played Half-Life 2, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you have, there's a few particular levels in that game that just feel really off. I'm not talking just when the face creatures jump onto your face and latch on. I'm talking about empty areas of the map where you just walk through and nothing is happening whatsoever. You don't see anybody, you don't hear anyone. It's like some low-key Lovecraftian shit. You don't know what's going on, but something feels completely off. Now, PT does that, but 16 million times more intensely. Walking through this looped corridor, you would assume in your head that things are very predictable. It's just the same corridor. The first door, moving on to the next door, which loops back to the first door. Then you realize that things begin to change. Put yourself in your own house. What if you look through your corridor? At first you feel comfortable and then you realize, holy shit, something wrong is happening here. That alone trumps anything that Alien Isolation does, but that's not it. As you hear this broadcast on the radio, it sounds normal until you listen into the story about a man who murdered his wife and his children. That itself is uneasy, but some messages begin to come through saying, "Don't touch that dial now," or "Look behind you. I said, look behind you." Immediately you get the same feeling as when you're in your house and you turn off the lights and you have to run up the stairs because it feels like something is breathing on your neck. You know you have eyes on you, but you don't know where from. You look for it, but you cannot find it. You feel your immense doom, but you can't do anything about it. There's just something so unsettling about this atmosphere, and for me personally, it's the most terrifying game I've ever played. Even when you get used to the jump scare, there's just something about the entire feel of that game that never leaves you comfortable even though you know what's gonna happen. For me, I'm more relieved when the jump scare happens because I get to briefly escape from that feeling of being trapped in that looped corridor. And also I have to say that I noticed that indie developers attempt to make games like PT, but to a fault. They see PT and what it did, and they see, oh man, it's dark, it's really creepy. Maybe we can emulate this and try to make our own version and maybe it'll be popular. But then you come up with a bunch of clones, a bunch of game clones that just really don't do anything. They're very hollowed out versions. They don't look into what these games are doing to make them successful. They just see, scary corridor, noises, jump scare, boom, it just falls back to them having the wrong idea of horror, which is pretty sad. And honestly, only one game has come close to what PT did, and that is Visage. But while Visage taps into the same feeling and it gets quite close to it, it fails in a few aspects, but maybe I'll cover that in another video. The key to true horror is to understand horror fully. And if you do not understand true horror, you will be missing some things. What are new horror games missing? As we were just talking about PT, that game immerses you to the point where you feel like you're really there. But another game related is Silent Hill 2. Now, given that Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001, a year after I was born, the gaming industry was fairly young and they didn't have much to deal with when it came to graphics. So the game does have things here and there like trash cans and health items lying around. So a lot of the detail was covered with fog, and most of the detail was put into the characters and the enemies and the important things in the game to scare the hell out of you. And despite not having as many graphical enhancements, you feel utterly immersed in the game, even if it doesn't look like our reality. Looking at a lot of newer games, while it looks absolutely amazing, there's always something to break your immersion, makes you feel like, oh yeah, I'm playing the game, I'm not scared anymore. Some people think that realism means immediate immersion, but that's not true. There's a fine line between it. Now, the next thing that I believe new horror games are missing: effective sound design and music. In Silent Hill 2, you have a radio. The radio emits a loud static when an enemy is coming towards you or you're coming towards an enemy. You don't hear exactly what direction the static is coming from, obviously, but you just hear static. And then you begin to hear the noises that these creatures make at the same time. It just emits such panic that it makes you tense up every time. You never feel comfortable. But if you turn the radio off, or in a level where you're stripped of that radio, you don't hear a thing. And then you have to debate, should I turn it back on? Because while it scared me to know that it was there, what if I don't know and it gets me? It's kind of like when you see a spider in a room, you leave to go get a shoe and you come back and it's completely gone and you have no idea where it went. That's the same feeling, but constantly. The radio, the sound of the creatures, the scraping of Pyramid Head's big blade when he comes walking through, the movements outside in the prison when you go to put the 3 plates in the platform and you just hear something coming towards you and moving away. And even to this day, I know there's no enemy out there that could attack you, but it sends chills down my spine, up and down. No matter how long I stay out there, I want to leave. That is effective sound design. And the music in Silent Hill 2 matches the theme of guilt and terror. The track that plays when you're in the alternate world of the hotel is absolutely filled with guilt and unease, and it feels like, hey, James cannot go back from what he did. The entire feel and theme of the game is just pushed into the music. It's amazing. But a lot of games nowadays, I can't find that. I played through Resident Evil Village, I played through Resident Evil 7. There's nothing there with the sound design and the music that just pushes that feeling into me, and it's really sad to see that part missing in horror games nowadays. And the third thing that I think that games are missing now, things to pull you in to get attached to the character. Still speaking on Silent Hill 2 because I think it's a perfect example. In the shoes of James, you feel what he feels, you see what he sees, you go through what he goes through. While his personality may not shout in your face, he has a goal in mind and it's your job to get him to that goal, and that goal itself makes you curious. Why is he so hell-bent on doing this? Why is this so important? And as you see these bad things happen to him, as you see people die around him, as you see his sorrow, his terror, his fear, and the longing for his wife, you become emotionally attached to James Sunderland until you realize what he did. It reminds me of a lot of episodes of Black Mirror, especially the one called Shut Up and Dance. You get attached to this character, you root for him, you see him going through these terrible things, you want him to be saved until you realize he was the bad guy the entire time. He was the ruin. He brought this ruin down upon himself. Now, how do you feel about that? Joel in The Last of Us, the same exact thing. We get to know these characters. We get to love these characters. And yet we feel betrayed once we found out who these characters really are. Are they a truly good person that you thought they were, but they just made a mistake? Or are they pieces of garbage who do not deserve redemption? There's a lot of games that don't answer that question nowadays. Now, the last point that I have to present, I believe that horror games have lost their magic because developers are afraid of losing success. Once again, sucking off Silent Hill 2. What makes it remarkable? Silent Hill 2 doesn't shy away from these dark and intense themes. Some of these themes are triggering to some people, but it doesn't shy away from it, and it handles it very well. It uses it to trigger inner fears that most people feel, or that a lot of people have gone through. Or instead of looking for temporary shock or something just to disgust the player, it aims to make a memorable experience that sticks with you and that sticks into your mind, and that's what the game does for me. For example, Angela's storyline in this game, it is a very dark and sensitive topic of the things that she goes through, and we see her for the first time and we think she's just crazy. Next time we see her, she's holding a knife, and near the mid-end of the game, we end up saving her from a room where there's a lot of symbolic things happening in the walls, and she gets attacked by what seems to be a bed that's constantly moving on the inside. We can kind of piece up what happened to her. And towards the end of the game, the thing that hits me the most is when James sees her at a staircase and the entire staircase is on fire, and he goes,
"It's hot as hell in here."
And she goes,
"You see it too. For me, it's always like this."
Just seeing that entire arc, that when I think about Silent Hill 2, it sticks in my head. The game pulls some kind of emotion out of me that no other game has ever made me feel. Not only was it horrifying to see and to hear about all the things that happened to her, it was also deeply impactful, and merging this emotion with horror, it makes the game much more than just cheap scares and thrill. Now, why are developers afraid of going down this path? I believe it's because larger developers are afraid that they'll lose sales and potential mainstream audience. After everything we talked about with Silent Hill 2, look at Resident Evil. I love the series. While it has a few missteps and there's flaws here and there, like with every series, I really enjoy the series. There's a lot of things that can happen there. There's a lot of things that can scare you, you know, getting chomped on by a zombie you didn't see, or Mr. X chasing you down a corridor, but it's more thrilling than scary. Resident Evil 7 uses super gross visuals and things like that, but you notice that game was still pretty mainstream. But things like Silent Hill get pushed back because they cannot really push the darker themes that those games handle to the mainstream. I really wish it wasn't the way it is, but we wanted to see why horror games have lost their magic, and it looks like we found the answer. So hopefully something turns around to where we can actually start getting quality horror games. Hey, maybe Silent Hills will return into production. We never know. But yeah, that's about it. If you watched the full video, type pyramid in the comments. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. Leave comments down below and tell me also what you thought about some of these points. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if I missed a point, be sure to drop it down in the comments as well. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. If you want to see some more video essays, let me know. I will catch y'all in the next video. Sayonara.